Thank you, Starly. It's wonderful. Thank you all for coming. This is an adventure, and what life is an adventure, right? So I'm on this adventure with other authors, and I started, when I wrote my book, I was told I had to have a launch party, and I said, people don't want to come and listen to me. So I picked the two most important nonfiction authors in San Antonio, and I said, let's listen to you talk about your journey. That's a message that we all need. So I'm honored to have here Diane Barrios Trevino. Everybody knows her from Los Barrios restaurants. We all have grown up with Los Barrios. And she and her mother and her brother Louis wrote one of the top-selling cookbooks. Yay! And it's still on a bestseller list. And that has really put your name, your brand, and your family on national stage. And that's one of the things that writing a book can do. And then we all know and love this man over here. Lionel Sosa is an icon. He represents San Antonio to so many people. You are kind of the heart of San Antonio. I met Lionel 12 years ago. But everybody here has known him for much longer. And he's been on the journey of writing a book for 20 years. When you published your first books, we're going to talk about that. But Lionel was one of the founders of the largest Hispanic ad agency in the United States for decades, and is an advertising communications icon, understands Hispanic marketing and consumer behavior better than anybody, founded multiple agencies, and you have been a voice in helping form the political dialogue of our country and the importance of Hispanics in politics, and you have worked on multiple presidential campaigns and political campaigns and really influenced the future of the world, especially the Hispanic market, which we are all proud of. We're in San Antonio. This is huge. We are a 55% Hispanic market. We embrace the Hispanic market as much as any population in the United States. So I'm honored to have these two esteemed people join me, and the topic is the journey of a successful author, what it takes to write a book and how to sell a book, and more importantly, how it contributes to building your personal and professional brand. So welcome to you two both. Thank you very much. And welcome to all you who've joined to come and spend this evening with us talking about this topic. So we have a story to write. I'm going to start with Lionel because you published your book first, right? And you have an interesting story. So why don't you tell us how you got from there to here?
Well, you know, there was a time in about the year 1999 that all the big book publishers were looking for books that would appeal to the Latino community, I think. And one of the largest book publishers in the world contacted both my cousin Diana and myself to write a book. And I got a call one day from a literary agent that said, do you think you could write a book of success, how Latinos can be successful in the United States? And I said, well, I don't know if I could, but let me give it a try. And so she kind of gave me not much of an outline. She says, if you were to write such a book, how would you write it? What would the chapters be? Give me an outline of what you would do. So I worked on it, and I sent her maybe, I don't know, a month later, I sent her a draft. And she called me back and she said, this is terrible, this is horrible, start all over. Start all over. So I said, well, how is it horrible? Give me some input so that I can improve it. She said, it's just so horrible, start all over. And so I started all over and gave it a second try, and she says it's a little bit better, but it's still pretty horrible. So give it another try. So on the third try, she said, you know, you've got the germ of some good ideas, but there's no way you could ever write a book. But I will do this. I think there's you've got germs of a good idea, but you cannot write, so I am going to assign you a ghostwriter. And this ghostwriter is one of the very, very best ghostwriters in the country. Now, here's the way it worked back in 2000, in 1999. This is almost 20 years ago. Is that there are these ghostwriters in New York that did ghostwriting for people that had an idea but couldn't write, like me. And they would help you write it. And they wouldn't charge anything unless you sold the book. And if you sold the book, then they would get half of whatever the advance was at the time. And at that time, they actually gave you in advance. If they thought you would take your draft to several publishing companies in New York, and if any book publishing company would like it, they would bid on it. And they would actually say, I will pay X number of dollars to have the privilege of publishing it. Well, this fellow said, I'll take a chance with you. I'll help you write it. So he came to San Antonio. We did an outline. The rest of the time, I would get up. To write a book, it takes focus and it takes time. And they gave me a year, actually 6 months to do the draft and then 6 months to do the final. And so we had a year to do the whole thing. We wrote what we thought would be a good book together. And we took it to the publishers, and the publishers bid on it, and the highest bidder said, I'll give them $120,000 to write a book. And well, you know, it's better than nothing, because the other one was $100,000 and the other one was maybe $50,000. I don't know what the number 2 and 3 were, but we were able to get that. So she said, okay, go ahead and write it. Then what you did at the time is that they would give you a contract, and you had to have that book completely written in 6 months. So what I would do at the time, because I had a business, a full-time business, I would get up at 4 in the morning. I would start writing from 4:30 to 8:30. Then I would shower and get ready for work to be at my office at 9 o'clock. But I did devote 4 days a week for 6 months, from 4:30 to 8:30, did nothing but do my best to write it. I would send him the drafts, he would rewrite them, and that's how it happened. I could have never done it on my own. I could have never done it without the help of the literary agents or the help of my ghostwriter. And it was just a fluke that came out of nowhere. Somebody called me one day and said, could you write such a book? I couldn't write it. They gave me the people that could help me write it and could help me publish it. And it went under the Penguin brand, that is one of the best book parks in the country. And so I thought I was going to be rich and famous. I went to New York City, and at Barnes & Noble in New York City, right there in Lincoln Center, I walked into the store, and at eye level was my book. I am going to be rich and famous. Nada. It did not happen. I spent my half of the $120,000, which was $60,000, promoting the book and traveling. So what happens is you go to the best bookstores all over the country. You have to pay your own airline fare, your own hotel. You go on radio shows, you go on TV shows, and then you have a book reading at a bookstore. 50 people show up, 5 people buy the book. You get $2 for each. That's what you do. So you make $10 $10 and you spent $3,500, you know? So that's kind of the way that it went, and then my $60,000 was gone. I didn't make a cent, I didn't get rich, I didn't get famous, but I had a book. And you know, and the book I think sold well. It sold about something like 25,000 copies nationwide, not nearly enough to be a bestseller, but even today I get emails that say, I read your book and it changed my life. And I get these, you know, maybe 1 or 2 a month, and I get them from people all over the world because it was translated into Spanish, and I'll get a letter from Argentina or somebody from Spain or somebody like that that says, I followed your advice and it changed my life. So, you know, I think all in all, I'm very happy that it happened. It was a total fluke. But that's my story, and Diana has a much more interesting one.
Okay, let's see how you follow that one up.
Well, thank you, and Lionel, I love that story. I love it. It's awesome, and it makes me very proud because, well, we're family. But you know, that's what San Antonio is all about, family. And that's what our book is. It's a family cookbook. It's the Los Barrios family cookbook. And I love the fact that Random House, who was also our publisher, actually a division of Random House, Villard Books, is who named it, and they said, Tex-Mex recipes from the heart of San Antonio. And we all know that San Antonio's heart is deep, it runs, and it's pure, and it's beautiful, and it's our culture. So our story is a little different, but it was around the same time. I was invited by what was then called the San Antonio Convention and Visitors Bureau to do Good Morning America from the Riverwalk in May of 1991. Yes. And, yeah, thank you. And, you know, they asked me and they said, can you submit some recipes and can you submit your menu? And do you have anything of yourself on tape? Because I've done local TV. At that point, I had been on TV for about 4 or 5 years. And I said yes, and they said, and we need it yesterday. So we had to get it right away, and we sent it off, and so I had to, you know, the city had pitched me to do this segment, and I had to submit all of this, and then they came back and they said, okay, we just have to get the okay from one more guy, and if he says that he's okay with you doing this segment with him, then you're in. I said, oh, okay. And then they called me like a day later, and they said, okay, he said yes. I said, okay, great. Who is he? And they said, oh, you're not doing the segment alone. You're going to be doing the segment with this guy. His name is Emeril Lagasse. Have you ever heard of him? I was like, yeah, I do. I have. I know exactly who he was. Now, mind you, this is 1999. It was May of 99. I was 4 months pregnant with my 3rd son, Diego. And long story short, this all happened in about 7 days span. So we get to do our segment from Good Morning America. They asked me to stay. They put me up at the Hilton Palacio del Rio because the Arneson was right there, and they didn't want me to be late. They didn't want me traveling from my house. They wanted to make sure I would get there on time, so I stayed there and came downstairs at 4 o'clock in the morning, all ready, and Emeril gets there at 6 a.m. He got to sleep in, okay. He was, you know, the celebrity, but he had gotten at 1 o'clock in the morning. We do our segment, and we had a great time. And one of the things that the city, they provided a food stylist and somebody that just that does all the styling of the table and the food, and it makes everything look picture perfect for TV. And so they had cascarones, and so I tell Emeril, I said, you know, we make a lot of great dishes with eggs, but this is the one we have the most fun with. And I cracked it, not on him, I did it on somebody else, and he's like, those are great. So this was in a commercial, goes back, and he's talking to the people in New York, and blah, 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 Diane Sawyer and all them, and then he cracks eggs on himself. I can't hear what he's saying. Mind you, there was 2,000 people there. We don't know what he's saying, but everybody starts cheering and yelling. It was great. Turns out wonderful. Well, that afternoon, after everybody goes back to sleep a little bit, and then I go back to Los Barrios, my family, we all go back to work, and walks Emeril. A few hours after that, we sat, drank, ate, talked to him, great guy. A few hours after that, I get a phone call, and it's from the food producer at Good Morning America. And she said, Diana, I'm already in Houston, but I want to let you know that I have a friend of mine, her name is Pamela Cannon. She's going to be calling you. I said, okay. Who is she? Why is she going to be calling? She says, well, she is an editor at Random House. She saw you this morning, and she wants to know if you would like to do a regional cookbook with them. I'm like, what? And that's how it was. 3 weeks later, well, we had a conversation with Pamela. 3 weeks later, we had a contract that was this thick. We did not have an agent. We just had an attorney who, an intellectual properties attorney who took care of everything for us. 3 years later, our cookbook came out. 3 years later. Yes, they tell you 6 months, and then they tell you another 6 months. They had to wait a little bit longer for ours because, you know, this is a true family collaborative effort. My brother Louis wrote the introduction. My mother and I worked on the recipes because, like any good, I don't care what ethnicity you are. It could be German, it could be Swedish, it could be Polish, it could be Italian, French, Jewish. It doesn't matter. These mamas, they don't jot down their recipes. Nothing was documented, nothing was measured, nothing was timed. And when we did our contract with Random House, they said, your recipes will be tested professionally, so they better work. Oh, okay. So it took 3 years to write this book. And mind you, I had my child. We wrote down 150 recipes because that's what they asked for. 2 months after my baby was born, he was born in November, I was walking in the garage, broke my ankle, my right ankle, so it kept me home writing more recipes and more books and testing. And I remember getting that manuscript, like, it's done. Here it is, it's typed up. I'm going to send it off to New York, and I'm not going to see that thing for 6 months. 3 days later, it was on my doorstep, all marked up in red. Kind of like what they said to you. Oh yeah. So then Pamela, our wonderful, wonderful publisher there at Random House, or editor, I mean, she said, okay, we're going to get on the phone, and we're going to, so, you know, put away 3 hours, we're going to be on the phone, we're going to edit, and you're going to tell me what you're trying to say. So she was kind of like my ghostwriter. What are you trying to say? What do you mean? And so I did that, and at the top, every time I would send the recipes, at the top I would do a little story like, we do this because this, or this is a recipe that we do during blah, blah, blah. Those were for her personal notes, so she would know what I was talking about. She called me, she goes, you know those little notes you wrote at the top of the recipe? She goes, write more. I like those. They give it a lot of feeling. And so we did. Our cookbook eventually was published. They were kind enough, the food producer from Good Morning America, who happens to be really good friends with Emerald, asked him if he would do the introduction, the forward for our book. That does not hurt to have his name on your cookbook. We did not get $120,000. I'm going to go back and tell them. No, I'm just kidding. But we did. We got a little, an advance is what they call it. I think it was $20,000. And we are very fortunate because we have restaurants. We have 4 restaurants now. We sell our cookbook in all 4 restaurants. And it still sells, and Random House is still printing our cookbook. You know, if a cookbook doesn't sell, or if a book doesn't sell, then they say, thank you very much, we're not going to print your book anymore. Ours is still being printed, so we're very grateful for that. You know, it's a labor of love. I am so grateful that I had that opportunity to spend that time with my mom and write these recipes down. And you know, we had every measuring tool around, you know, because she didn't cook from a recipe. She cooked because she knew what she saw, what she knew. So she'd say, we're going to take what's in here, and then she would throw it in. And I'd go, no, I need to measure what's in there. So some of our recipes we did like 3 or 4 times in a row. I will tell you this, my neighbors are always asking, when are you writing another cookbook? because they got to eat all that food. I'd bring it home and I'd say, do y'all want this? We're testing recipes and I don't want to throw this food away. Do y'all want it? Oh, yes, 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 please, we'll take it. And they would give it the thumbs up, of course. But anyway, I always tell everybody this is a great gift for a homesick Texan because this little book has traveled all over the world. I have stories from people that you would not believe. How our very good customer here in San Antonio, who she and her husband sold all of their belongings, bought a boat, and sailed up and down Florida Keys, the Bahamas. They bought a book here when she was in town one day. She said, send it, this is for our friends. They are on a boat. We go to dinner back and forth from their boat to our boat. She gave it to them as a gift. And then they're there 6 months, and then they go back home 6 months. So these people went home. Then I have another friend, Pernie Shea. I don't know if y'all know Pernie. She's from Beaver on the Banks. She and her husband travel a lot, and they went to Alaska. And they went, and they took a big plane, then they took a little plane, and then they took this bus, and then they ended up at this B&B in the middle of nowhere. And they walk in, and she screams when she's telling me the story. And there was your book! It was in this middle of nowhere place. And it was the book that our friend, who sold all her possessions, moved to live on the boat, gave to her friends that have the boat where they go have dinner. Those people were from Alaska, and that's the bed and breakfast that Pernie and Bill went to. It's amazing. I have another customer who says, she comes back, she doesn't live here, she comes back to see her mother, and they live in Iceland at the NATO base there, and she said, you know, it's very rare when we get English reading material. She said, and I walked in one day and there was 3 copies of your book. She goes, I bought 2 of them. I said, why? She goes, because it was from San Antonio and I read it and it made me feel good. She said, I don't cook anything out of it. It's just on my counter. I'm like, you leave it there. You come see us at the restaurant, we'll cook. This is a great little billboard that is on everybody's counter or in everybody's kitchen, a little reminder to come and see us. So that has helped us building our brand. And I have lots of stories. There's just a million stories about this little blessing, this little cookbook that came to be. And I tell everybody that it is a great gift for any homesick Texan. It's any great gift for a child that has grown up in San Antonio and is getting married and has no idea how to cook. This is the baby you need to give them. And I always tell everybody to start with the last recipe first. It's for sangria. Sangria, and then you cook, everything's great.
That is absolutely wonderful. I've never heard these stories, so this is all new and exciting to me. And that's an interesting story. You gonna ever write another one?
Who knows? Never say never. I never thought we'd have 4 restaurants. We have 4 restaurants. So I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to write a cookbook, another cookbook, but I don't have one in the works right now. Let's just say. But never say never, because we've thought about it. So maybe.
You've written more than one book. After your first book, then what brought you to your second book?
Well, the second book was another one of these things that just happens out of nowhere. When I was 23 years old, I read a book that changed my life called Think and Grow Rich. And in about 2003, I got a call from a friend of mine who was working with McDonald's, who had a friend that was on the board of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, which publishes Think and Grow Rich. They still sell about 6 million copies of the book worldwide in something like 31 different languages. And this book is now 82 years old. It was published in 1937. And what does that, no, that makes it 81 years old. But it is a book that kind of, they were looking for somebody to write the Latino version of Think and Grow Rich. And the minute I saw that, I saw that they were looking for a book, I called the person and I said, I'm your man. He says, well, we're just starting to look I said, no, that book changed my life. I am your man. If you want to have a book written about Think and Grow Rich for Latinos, I am your man. When can I see you? I said, well, we're in Chicago. I'll fly to Chicago. When can I see you? Well, can you come tomorrow? Yes, I can. Kathy and I got up because Kathy supports me in every crazy thing that I do. There's nothing that I do that she's not fully behind, no matter how weird it is. And she went with me and we made a deal right then and there. They didn't interview anybody else because I knew that book inside and out. So they asked me to write it. They did give me an advance. And once again, I used the advance to promote it. Didn't make any money, but it was another book that I hope did some good for some folks. I don't have it here only because I thought that Twig had ordered it and would have it here. But it is a book that's been published in English and Spanish and has been all over the world. And this is the one that I'm writing now, and it is called The Success Mindset, Disrupting the Cycle of Generational Poverty. Because this is what Kathy and I are doing now, using our advertising skills to convince people who have lived in poverty for generations that they are capable of doing much more. They don't know what they can do because they've never experienced it and they've never experienced anything other than where they've been. So if you've been poor for 3 or 4 or 5 generations, you accept poverty as something that's going to happen. And as much as people keep working in the United States to try to lower the level of poverty, I'm finding that the numbers get a little bit bigger every year. Why is that? Because if somebody has been living in poverty for 2 generations, guess what they do? Unconsciously, they create another generation of poverty. For every one person that is able to get out of that generational poverty, 4 stay in it. Because they think that that's the way that life should be. So we are using all of the experiences that I've had in my 50 years of being in advertising, communication, and marketing to convince people that they can do better than they think they can. And to do it in a way that reaches the child every day for 15 minutes a day. The only way to do that is through this public school system, so that the teachers put something in front of them every day. Not in the book, but on a tablet and on the computer. And then we are able to reach each parent 3 times a week on their smartphone, giving them the same types of messages so that the kid becomes excited about school, knows what they're in school for, becomes motivated, comes to school more often, makes better grades, tests better, stays in school longer, graduates, and makes college a decision that is conscious in every family. Mama and daddy and grandma and sister and brother buy in on it because they're getting the same messages at home, and they don't have to go to parents' night at 5 o'clock on Thursday. They get the message anytime they want. If they can see it at 11 o'clock at night, that's fine. Or 7 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it doesn't matter. It's at their convenient time. So, by repeating the proper message often enough to the proper target audience, which is the child and their parents, we believe that we can convince anybody to do almost anything. That's been proven in advertising. If you've got the right message to the right person and you're communicating that at least 20 times a month, you can convince a person to buy this product instead of that product, to vote for this person instead of another person. Why not to change a mindset? Why not? They say that poverty is a state of mind. I believe that it is. If poverty is a state of mind, why don't we start changing that state of mind?
Yeah.
So that is our goal, to change that state of mind. And we've been very, very lucky. We started 3 years ago with 100 students in one school. And we are now to 10,000 students in 8 school districts just 3 years later. We weren't able to raise a penny 3 years ago because nobody knew we existed. And it's called Yes, Our Kids Can. I invite you to load down the app. It's free. It's called Yes, Our Kids Can. And see what it's all about. It's songs, it's games, it's puzzles, it's all kinds of wonderful activities that a kid gets into. It's people reading books to them so that they're on their smartphone, and instead of having games that kill people, they're having games that help them build their lives, that help them build their goals and have them build a future. Because what happens is that when a family is very, very poor, they lose their ability to plan. Why? They don't know whether they can pay the rent tomorrow. They don't know whether their car is going to run tomorrow. They don't know whether their child is going to be in the same school tomorrow. When they can't plan for tomorrow, they can't plan for their child's future. They can't plan for a career. They lose their ability to plan. Here, we're teaching them to plan and to have a career, to stay in school, to go to college, and to have a successful, productive life. And nobody else in the country is doing it. Nobody else in the world is doing it. So we're building a company. We now have 25 full-time people. We have raised a little over $2 million from foundations right here in San Antonio, and we have 10,000 students and families enrolled. So we think that by using technology and using videos, instead of people training teachers, instead of people training parents, instead of people training children, we can do kind of what Mr. Rogers used to do many years ago, use the media to convince kids to feel good about themselves, to feel good about school, but also to plan their lives for a future and a real rewarding career. So I'm really excited about this one, in fact, I think I'm more excited about this little book than I have been in any of the others, because this is not just, it's not just using advertising to convince people to buy Coke instead of Pepsi. It's using advertising techniques to convince people to have a life of success instead of a life by default.
Wow, that is so motivational. I think that part of what we're talking about is the journey. We're all on life's journey. We don't know it because we mastered it. You mastered advertising a million years ago, but you are using...
Maybe 2 million.
I'm sorry, a few years ago. But you are taking that experience and you're building on it. And that's part of what, can I talk about my mission a little bit? What I'm doing right now? Okay. I don't have any of the credentials that they have. I published my book myself, and you published your last book yourself, right? So I want to hear about that story a little bit. But I started on a different journey. I worked in advertising and marketing and all over the world for big companies like Johnson & Johnson, Frito-Lay, Carnation, Nestle, CBS Cable. And about 3 years ago, here in San Antonio, I started teaching at Texas A&M UIW. And I taught marketing and branding, And I was stunned to learn that these bright, talented students who were spending $128,000 in tuition didn't know how to get a job when they graduated in 4 months. So I went home and I wrote a presentation that grew up to be a seminar, that grew up to be a webinar, that eventually grew up to be a book, to teach college students and early career professionals how to use the marketing and branding skills that I'm teaching them in class to market their most important things themselves. And that's how I started on this book. Interesting journey. While I was promoting this book, I ran into so many people who came and said, could you help me please? I've lost my job, I'm 55, I can't get an interview, I'm living in my car, I'm supporting my family off of food banks, I'm talented and I'm credentialed, and I'm good at what I do, but I can't even get an interview. How do I do this? How do I break through this age barrier? And I became very aware of age discrimination in America. We try and say it's legal, but it happens everywhere. And it's horrible, and we can change that. It's becoming aware of it. And part of my journey, it's interesting, I don't know if it's Tony Robbins who said, I think it is, or Russell Brunson who said, as you become an attractive character or a person of influence, you have 3 different roles. You start as a struggler. You're finding your way and you don't know what you're doing. Then you become a Sherpa. You found your way a bit and you're helping other people to get there faster and easier than you did. And then when you're at the top, you become the sage. You know everything and then you can teach people everything. Well, I started at the sage, and today I'm doing it backwards. I'm the struggler trying to help my generation figure out what do we do when we grow up. Age, if you're 65 today, your life expectancy is 83. How are you going to support yourself for 18 years after retirement age? And what in the world are you going to do during those 18 years that's meaningful? So that's the mission behind my book. And it's interesting, I've discovered that I could not even get an interview today for a job that I had rocked 20 years ago. I wouldn't even get an interview. And so many people are facing this. So I'm on a mission to change the way America hires, fires, and retires its most experienced workers. And that's kind of the mission behind my book. And we're each on different missions. And we're each writing in different genres. And we're each using this experience that we have to advance and to share with others. We want to give and to share with others. And I think that's so exciting to be here with you and all of us sharing our lovingly giving to other people and helping us in our challenges in life. So, thank you very much. Now, Lionel, you have a book that you skipped over. I'd love for you to tell us about your middle book.
I don't want to suck up all the oxygen here, but I'll just keep it really, really short. The Children of the Revolution was my wife's idea, Kathy. Because I kept talking about the fact that both my grandmothers had come to the United States as young ladies with kids and no husbands to escape the Mexican Revolution. And that and I would tell them about their struggles and how similar their lives were from my mother's side of the family and from my father's side of the family. And she said, I wonder how many more people have stories like that. So we would go to El Mirador restaurant right near our house, and I just started asking the folks that came in there, Alex Briceño, Henry Cisneros, the Castros, because everybody used to go to El Mirador, and they all had a story. So I told Kathy, I think I'm going to write a book about that. And she said, no way, I'm writing a book on that, and if you want to do something else, do television or something. So we started interviewing all these folks, and we just put a camera in front of them, and they told their story. And then we asked them to bring their shoebox of books, and we went to KLRN, We showed them one of these an episode. They loved it. They said, "Can you do 4 more? We'll buy it, and we'll help you find somebody to fund it." Well, they didn't do such a good job at finding a funder. I found a funder for 4 chapters, but by that time, we had so much footage in the can that we couldn't stop. We just kept going and going and going, and they kept running them until we had 20 different 30-minute programs. They're running right now on KLRN tomorrow. They run every Thursday, and they do 2 chapters every Thursday. They'll be running the rest of the year. This is the first time that they have run it since the initial presentation in 2011, 100 years plus 1 year after the anniversary of the Mexican Revolution.
And I remember watching it then.
You remember watching? Well, you know, apparently some people are watching it right now because our Facebook page is going crazy again. And it had been pretty dormant for a while. Anyway, there's stories of why people came across, and the historic part about it is that 1 million people from Mexico came across the border to live in the United States between 1910 and 1935, and they composed the first 1 million Latinos that are now part of the 55 million Latinos in the U.S. But the Mexicans that came from the Mexican Revolution and settled in the U.S. were the first Latinos in this country. So San Antonio has a hell of a national and international story to tell. So then afterwards, Kathy went ahead and let me do the book version of it. And she wrote the introduction for it because it was her idea all along. And bless her soul, she helped me with the editing and all of that stuff. She's always right there. Can you stand up for just a second?
Yeah, Kathy, come on! And everybody knows Kathy is an acclaimed artist.
Yeah. Of course, she's a famous artist, and she makes a hell of a lot more money than it, because I've never made any money on any of my books.
I don't believe it. I teach at Texas A&M San Antonio, and every time I go on campus, I walk by, that's a Lionel, that's a Kathy, that's a Lionel, that's a Kathy. Their beautiful portraits are throughout the campus, and it's a real testimony to part of the difference that you and Kathy have made on the landscape of San Antonio. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Diane, you have a legacy also. Your family has a wonderful story and a tragic story. And you are living to honor your mom also, right?
That's correct. That is correct. And we do it because we're so blessed to have, well, first of all, both of my parents. My father died young. When I was very young, he died in a car accident. But my mom, she's been gone 10 years. And every day we honor her and her memory. And we actually opened up a restaurant 5 years ago called Violas Ventanas, and Kathy and Lionel were very much a big part of it. As a matter of fact, if you walk into Los Barrios, the original, there's this gorgeous, big, beautiful painting of my mother that Kathy did, and it's beautiful, and we love it. And she has a story to tell about that portrait, but you'll have to ask her because she was inspired beautifully. And so with her permission, she allowed us to use it as part of Violas Ventanas restaurant, where we honor my mom every single day. And you know, it's amazing. San Antonio is really big, but it's really small, and it's all family, and it's a beautiful community. And I'm just so grateful that my grandfather, my mother's father, brought my mother over here from Mexico, and she met my father, and the rest is history. And we have this beautiful, beautiful legacy that we continue to honor them because, well, we wouldn't be here without them, but what they taught us and the lessons that we learned, the culture, the bicultural education that they instilled in us my whole life, and something that we get to share. You know, our little cookbook, it's amazing. it's gone all over the place, and we've gotten to be on TV all over the place. We got invited to go to the White House in 2010 and cook at the congressional picnic and make puffy tacos. I mean, because our cookbook talks about puffy tacos, and then Bobby Flake talked about puffy tacos and showed them on TV, and then they took us to the White House, and a friend of mine said, okay, that's it. When you go cook for the Pope, I'm going with you. I said, well, I'm waiting. I'm still waiting for that invitation. But I mean, it is amazing how this little book has gotten us into so many places. I've done TV shows, A Day in the Life of a San Antonian that aired all over Europe and all over the place. Had a customer come in the other day and she says they're from Europe but they live here, and her husband's European, she is an American, but they live here now. She subscribes to this channel, and she walked in, she's like, you did great on that show. And I'm like, what show are you talking about? Because nobody's ever said anything about that show. And she said, I saw it and you made me so proud. And I was like, well, I'm so glad that somebody saw it. They liked it, and they told us. I did another show where they came and it was a German, it was filmed in my home, and really talking about the casero style of cooking that we do, which is what we do in our restaurants. It's what my mom started doing. And this show aired in Germany and Switzerland and Austria, and the host was doing the whole show in German, and then he talked to me in English, and then he translated it back in German. I'm like, how long is this show going to last? I went back and forth. I didn't understand anything, but it was a lot of fun. And so we've been blessed and honored that we have been able to represent our city and showcasing the warmth, the beauty of San Antonio. And, you know, never say never. You know, never in a million years did we think we would get a cookbook offer. It was something that was never in the works. We didn't think about it, but here we have it, and it still sells. And I think really one of the greatest compliments we've ever had is when a woman came into the restaurant with her siblings, well, with some of her family, not all of them. She says, you know, our grandmother raised us because, well, our parents weren't around, and our grandparents raised us, and so our grandmother was the cook in the family, and I'm the oldest of 10 siblings. She said, and when my grandmother passed away, my siblings came to me and said, well, do you know how to cook what abuela used to make? And she was like, no, because they didn't have anything written down. They didn't have a cookbook. And so, but she was the oldest, and she felt that responsibility. And she said, but I'm going to work on it. She didn't know how to make arroz con pollo, which was the very first recipe she started with. So she took our cookbook and she read the recipe and she made it. And she said, well, it doesn't taste like my abuela's, but I know that my abuela added this, and I remember she added that. So little by little she practiced, and she'd call her siblings and say, y'all come on over, I tried it, so you guys come and tell me what I'm lacking. And so it allowed her family to get together. They still do this once a month, and she cooks. And it started with the arroz con pollo. She's done the fideo, and they all remember parts of the recipe of their grandmother, but they had no idea how to even start. And they didn't even know how to start to cook. Like, she's like, do you boil the chicken? Do you roast the chicken for arroz con pollo? And so she's like, I looked at your recipe, it's easy, and I just copied it, and it came out. And that's the beautiful thing about our recipe book. These recipes do work. They're very easy to follow. But that story of that family reuniting around a table to share a meal, 10 siblings and their kids. I said, are you going to open up a restaurant? Because you cook for a lot of people now. And so, I mean, it's a beautiful story, and stories like that just continue to make us feel good about the decision to write the book. And yes, there are restaurant recipes in there, and yes, we put all of the ingredients except for one. But I'll tell you what that one recipe is, because this is what my mother said. We're going to tell them everything they want to know, but they are responsible for the last ingredient, and that's puro corazón. It's from your heart. You got to cook with love, because When you're mad and you cook, that's when it's super spicy. And you can't even eat it because you're so mad. And she loves this.
Oh, you have that in your family too.
That's what my mom would say. She was never mad. At least not with me. My brother, I don't know about that. What do you think, Lionel? Do you think she was ever mad at Louis? Lionel?
I'm sorry?
Do you think my mother was ever mad at Louis? Because my mother never got mad at me.
You know, your mother never got mad at your mother never got mad at anybody. She had the biggest heart of gold there ever was. And every time anybody came into her restaurant, it was the abrazos abiertos, you know, where I'm here. She was so glad to see everybody. She was so glad to see us. I felt special every time I walked in there. She had all the time in the world for us and for anybody else.
That's true, very true. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much. Before we finish, how many of you have already written a book? Raise your hand. We have a bunch of authors here. How many of you want to write a book? How many of you never considered it until you heard us tonight? No? Writing a book increases your credibility by 30% overnight by saying, I'm an author, by having a book. And I'd love you to give some tips for some of these current authors and new authors about what you've learned. The industry has changed a lot. There are not a lot of publishers who are knocking on your door and giving you $100,000 advances today. Instead, the technology has changed so that many of us are self-publishing, like I did, and many of you are going to be facing that because the publishing paradigm has changed. We're fortunate to have Sam representing the largest independent, most important independent bookstore in San Antonio, the Twig. Bookstores are being challenged because multimedia is changing things. Amazon is transforming the world. Print on demand is changing the industry. Kindle and ebooks is changing how we consume media. YouTube is changing the way that we consume content. And so the whole informational products and advice and coaching industry is changing dramatically. So it's a whole new world. So you actually, are you going to have a publisher, or are you going to self-publish this one?
This is going to be self-published, and but it is part of what we're using to promote Yes Our Kids Can, because we came out of nowhere. We're not educators. We have to make ourselves viable in the educational community because we are not education. We don't have an education background. We've hired a lot of people in education to write the curriculum and to put together what needs to be done in order to reach the children and the families, but I have no credibility in education. So writing a book, and really the book is about the story of building, flying an airplane while we're building, you know? So it's one of these things that it's an incomplete story, but I felt a need to begin to write it, and it's going to be a booklet at first, but I think we're going to have a second and third edition of it where we keep telling the story and to where we finally reach our goal of proving that a large section of a metropolitan area can move from this economic structure to this other economic reality, and instead of being folks that take from the system through welfare, through having to build prisons, etc., will become better parents, better citizens, voters, consumers, taxpayers, and contribute to the economy rather than having to be dependent on government to do it. So it's going to be a few years until we can prove all that, but I think that we'll be able to do it a little step at a time.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I have Thank you. I have organized a meetup group, and that's kind of how this started. And it's called Build Your Brand with Your Nonfiction Book. I've learned that writing a book is hard. Selling the book is even harder, and it's much more expensive, and many times much more time-consuming is getting the word out there. So my goal in this meetup group is to help current and aspiring authors become motivated, get your book printed, published, written, and create mechanisms for learning how to market your book. So if you're interested, it's a meetup group called Build Your Brand with Your Nonfiction Book. My idea is that this should be the first of many events like this. I have brought two of the most famous authors here, but I would love to showcase other authors on this journey that we all have. We're trying to change the world, one book at a time, change people's memories, change people's experiences, change people's outcomes in life. And I invite all of you to join us on that wonderful journey of love, giving back, discovery, and writing your nonfiction book. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us tonight.